You bring him back, and you break this whole family, Wade." That was what my mother told me through a cracked car window, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. 3 hours earlier, a nursing home had called my phone. My parents had told my grandfather they were just taking him to lunch. Instead, they brought him to the Whispering Pines lobby, forged the commitment papers, and walked away. When I pulled my heavy rig up to rescue him, his weathered hands were resting quietly on his suitcase. He did not look broken. He simply buckled his seatbelt, looked straight ahead, and said, "Burn their fake will, and just drive." Thank you for watching this video. Before I take you back there, do me one small favor. Take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. It helps more than you know. My name is Wade Collins. I am 44 years old. For 22 years, I have hauled heavy agricultural freight across the Midwest. I know how to read weigh station scales, and I know how to read shipping manifests. In my family, however, my only title was the outcast. My father, Roland Collins, was a wealthy agricultural board member, a man who treated our local farming community like his own personal empire. He wore a mask of pure generosity for the town, playing the role of the golden son who took over the farm to care for his aging father. My older brother, Clayton, was his eager prince, always ready to enforce my father's will. I was the one who drove away at 22 and never looked back, convinced that my grandfather, Harlan Collins, had chosen them over me. That Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed on the dashboard of my truck. The caller ID showed Whispering Pines, an assisted living facility 190 miles away. A woman named Gladys spoke in a hushed, apologetic tone. She told me my parents had brought my 88-year-old grandfather in that morning. They signed admission papers, paid for 1 week in advance, and then they completely vanished. He had been sitting in the lobby for 3 hours. He refused to go to a room. He refused to take off his coat. He just waited. I locked the air brakes on my rig and turned the massive truck around. For 190 miles, my hands gripped the steering wheel with an icy fury. I thought about my father's empire. I thought about how the golden child finally decided to dispose of the man who built it all. When I finally pulled into the circular driveway of Whispering Pines, my grandfather walked out through the sliding glass doors before I could even park. He climbed up into the heavy cab of my truck without asking for help. He sat down, pulled the heavy canvas seat belt across his chest, and stared through the windshield. "Don't call them," he said, his voice completely steady. "Burn their fake will, and just drive." He gave me the directions to his own house, not my father's house. The porch light was still burning when we arrived. Inside, the kitchen looked exactly like a place someone intended to return to in an hour. A half-empty coffee cup sat by the sink. His daily pill organizer rested on the windowsill. The sheer cruelty of the ambush hung heavily in the quiet air. They had taken him out for lunch and drove him straight into a trap. I sat down at his worn wooden dining table. I asked him the question that had haunted me for over 2 decades. I asked him why he signed the 500-acre corn farm over to my father 22 years ago, right after my grandmother passed away. My grandfather looked at me with an expression of profound stillness. "Who told you I ever signed it over, Wade?" He walked into the hallway and opened a heavy iron wall safe. He brought out a stack of banded documents and set them on the table. There was no deed of transfer. There was no lease agreement. There was not a single piece of paper bearing Roland Collins' name as the owner of the land. Instead, my grandfather explained the arrangement. Every single year, on the 1st of July, my father sat at that very table and handed him a plain white envelope containing rent money. $35 an acre. It was a completely insulting, entirely stagnant rate that had never been raised in 22 years. My father did not own the empire. He was just renting it, but he paraded around town like the undisputed king. The next morning at 6 o'clock, we drove my truck out to a neighboring farm. Amos was a 70-year-old man who ran the massive harvesting combines for most of the county. He poured us black coffee in his kitchen, completely unaware of the storm brewing. Amos casually mentioned that my father had already warned him that the farming arrangement was going to change this summer. Then, Amos pulled down a rubber-banded stack of yellow weight tickets from the top of his refrigerator. He showed me the records of 22 years of harvests. I have read thousands of weight tickets in my career. I know exactly where to look. I traced my finger down to the top right corner of the yellow paper. The corn did not go into the cooperative under my father's name. It went in under Harlan Collins. My father used my grandfather's legacy account because it had the oldest membership, the best premium contracts, and the highest dividend payouts. For 22 years, Roland Collins had reaped the immense financial benefits of his father's name while secretly plotting to discard him. He acted as the authorized signer, entirely draining the value of the old man's legacy. But the absolute worst part was waiting for us back at the house. I opened the bottom drawer of the safe and found a thick stack of property tax receipts. I sat on the faded linoleum floor and lined them up next to the empty white rent envelopes. The staggering reality of my father's greed finally clicked into place. Every July, my father handed my grandfather a small envelope of cash for rent. A week later, my grandfather took that exact same cash down to the county office to pay the property taxes on the massive farm my father was profiting from. My father was farming 500 acres of prime agricultural land completely for free. He built his golden reputation on the back of an 88-year-old man. The sheer predatory nature of the arrangement made my blood run entirely cold. We drove into the county clerk's office that afternoon. The clerk behind the counter pulled up the public records. Harlan Collins was still the sole legal owner of the estate, but there was a note clipped to the physical file. A few years ago, someone had tried to file a change of address form to redirect all of my grandfather's mail to my father's house. The signature line was blank. The clerk had rejected it. I stood on the sidewalk outside the county office and looked at the calendar on my phone. The pieces of the trap snapped together in my mind. The prepaid week at the nursing home perfectly covered the 1st of July, the exact date the yearly lease was supposed to renew. My father and my brother did not just want a cheap lease anymore. They wanted the entire estate. If they kept my grandfather locked in Whispering Pines long enough to miss the lease renewal, they could easily get a corrupt doctor to declare him mentally unfit. They would secure a legal power of attorney. They would become the sole trustees of the estate, executing a fake will of their own design to permanently steal the land without ever needing his signature. They were predators circling a wounded animal, entirely confident in their victory. Little did they know, they had just handed us the exact weapon we needed to destroy them. By Friday evening, the town gossip mill was churning. The phone on the kitchen wall rang. It was an elderly neighbor, nervously checking in. She casually mentioned that the whole town heard I had kidnapped my confused, dementia-ridden grandfather. My father's mask of respectability was already working. He was spinning the narrative, painting himself as the tragic victim and me as the deranged outcast. My grandfather took the receiver from my hand. He spoke into the phone with a voice as hard as winter ice. "I have been packing my own suitcase since 1956, he stated, and hung up the phone. We could not fight this with lawyers. The legal system moves incredibly slow, and an 88-year-old man does not have months to waste in federal courtrooms fighting a fabricated estate fraud case. The town had spent 22 years believing the land belonged to Roland Collins. A piece of paper from a judge would not change their minds. We had to shatter the facade right in front of them. Saturday afternoon, the conflict finally arrived at our doorstep. A heavy pickup truck blocked the dirt road leading to the farmhouse. My brother Clayton stepped out, his face twisted with pure arrogance. He leaned against the hood of his truck, treating the property like he already held the deed. "You do not get a vote in this, Wade," Clayton spat, his voice loud and incredibly abrasive. "Dad already sold the entire crop on a forward contract. He locked in the price months ago. If he does not deliver that corn under the old man's account, he defaults. He goes entirely bankrupt. You put him back in that home where he belongs." The passenger window of the truck slowly rolled down. My mother, Martha, stared at me from behind her dark sunglasses. Her face was a mask of cold calculation. "You bring him back, and you break this whole family, Wade," she said. I looked at my mother. I looked at my brother. My expression remained completely frozen. "Get off the property," I said. They spun their tires in the dirt and drove away, absolutely certain they had intimidated me into submission. They viewed my grandfather as a liability and me as a minor inconvenience. Little did they know, the trap they built was about to snap shut on their own necks. That night, the heavy Midwestern heat broke, leaving a cool breeze sweeping across the porch. My grandfather and I sat in the dark, listening to the crickets. I finally asked him why he let them treat him like a ghost in his own kingdom for 22 years. I asked him why he never fought back. He looked out over the dark fields, his eyes reflecting a profound, ancient patience. He told me about the promise he made to my grandmother on her deathbed. She knew exactly how greedy their golden son was. She made my grandfather promise never to hand over the deed to anyone who demanded it. She told him to hold the land, to endure the silence, and to wait for the one person who would willingly come back to protect him without asking for a single dime. I waited 22 years to see which one of you would still come back, my grandfather said quietly. You drove 190 miles, Wade. The crushing weight of 22 years of feeling utterly inadequate instantly evaporated from my chest. I was not the outcast. I was the one who passed the test. He was not a victim. He was a hunter who had patiently waited in the blind for over 2 decades. And on Monday morning, we were going to pull the trigger. Monday was harvest day. At dawn, the massive combine harvesters rolled through the fields. Usually, my father stood at the edge of the cornfield, posing like a wealthy baron overseeing his empire. Today, the edge of the field was completely empty. He was hiding, assuming the nursing home had secured his prize. He had sold the crop on a premium forward contract back in March. To fulfill that legal obligation and get paid, he absolutely had to dump that harvested corn into the cooperative under my grandfather's specific account number. If he dumped it anywhere else, he would breach a massive federal agricultural contract and face absolute financial ruin. He was entirely locked into the system he had exploited for years. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I pulled my heavy rig into the gravel lot of the agricultural cooperative. The air was incredibly thick with diesel exhaust and floating grain dust. 15 massive transport trucks were idling in a long, winding line, waiting to cross the scales. These drivers were the lifeblood of the county, the men who actually knew how the world worked. My grandfather opened the passenger door of my truck. He did not ask for my arm. He did not use a cane. He walked across the dusty gravel lot with his back completely straight, marching directly toward the scale house window. Russell, the cooperative manager, looked up from his computer screen in absolute shock. Good morning, Russell, my grandfather said, his voice easily carrying over the idling diesel engines. Harlan Collins. Account number 4702. Before Russell could even type the numbers, a sleek new SUV came tearing into the gravel lot, sliding wildly before slamming into park. My father practically leaped out of the vehicle. His eyes were wide with sheer panic, but the moment he saw the audience of 15 truck drivers watching him from their cabs, the mask of the golden sun slammed back into place. He sprinted over, plastering a sickeningly sweet smile on his face, reaching out to grab my grandfather's arm like a concerned caretaker. Dad, what in the world are you doing out here? My father said, his voice loud enough for the entire lot to hear. You are confused. You are sick. Let us get you back to the facility where you belong. My grandfather looked down at my father's outstretched hand. He did not move. He did not flinch. He just let my father's hand hang in the empty air for 5 agonizing seconds. The rejection was absolute. My father's smile completely cracked. His face drained of color. I stepped up beside my grandfather. My father glared at me, his eyes filled with absolute venom. Russell, my father barked, his voice dropping the gentle facade entirely. Write these load tickets to me. He is not mentally fit to authorize this. I looked at the long line of idling trucks. I looked at the cooperative manager. Then, I looked directly into my father's terrified eyes. My voice was icy calm. For 22 years, Roland, you put your grain in that pit under his name, I said, projecting my voice so every driver could hear. You used his legacy account to get premium contracts. You paid him $35 an acre in rent, and then you let him use that exact same money to pay the property taxes on the land you were exploiting. You farmed it for free. You built your entire empire on his back, and last Thursday, you dumped him in a lobby with a forged medical warrant to steal the deed. Several drivers in the line immediately killed their diesel engines. The sudden, heavy silence in the massive gravel lot was absolutely deafening. The makeshift jury of the town was now in session. My father opened his mouth to speak, but he had absolutely no defense. If he explained the account, he admitted to tax fraud. If he explained the rent, he admitted to economic abuse. He was completely trapped in a snare of his own design. Russell, the manager, looked at the screen. He was the institutional authority, the man who held the final legal power in this transaction. He looked at my grandfather. "What do you want to do with the account, Mr. Collins?" Russell asked quietly. My grandfather looked at his golden son, watching the empire completely crumble into dust. "Write the weight tickets to me," my grandfather commanded. "Send the final settlement check to my home mailbox, and permanently remove Roland Collins as an authorized signer on my estate." My father stood frozen in the dust. The legal strike was absolute. He had 15 trucks of harvested corn sitting behind him. He had two choices. He could drive away, default on his massive forward contract, and lose everything to the bank by noon. Or he could dump the corn into my grandfather's account, surrendering all the profit, and publicly humiliating himself in front of the entire county. My father looked at the ground. He silently signaled his drivers to dump the grain. He chose the humiliation. The mask was utterly shattered. 6 months later, I am sitting on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the winter snow gently cover the quiet fields. I have a profound sense of peace that no amount of money could ever buy. Meanwhile, they are completely ruined. My father was forced to immediately resign in disgrace from the agricultural board. His reputation in the county was entirely destroyed, and my brother Clayton lost the inheritance he so desperately craved. My mother's cold threats vanished into the wind. We never spoke to any of them again. A week after that morning at the scales, my grandfather and I sat in a quiet county office. With the single strike of an official stamp, the deed to the 500-acre estate was legally transferred into my name. The outcast inherited the kingdom. Inside the heavy iron safe in the hallway, I still keep that empty white envelope. It is a permanent reminder of the 22 years of lies, and the one morning we finally burned their fake empire to the ground. I have the respect of my grandfather, and I have my integrity, things their greed could never understand. Thank you for staying until the end. If there is an empty envelope in your family, a toxic arrangement that everybody just quietly accepted but nobody ever challenged, I would like to hear about it in the comments. How did you finally break the cycle? And if you enjoyed this story of justice being served, please like and subscribe for more.